This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Have you tried the Name Your Price tool yet? It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. It's easy to start a quote and find a rate that works for you. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive. Get your quote today at Progressive.com and see why 4 out of 5 new auto customers recommend Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
This episode is brought to you by V8 Plus Energy. In every 8-ounce can of V8 Plus Energy, you're getting a combined serving of fruits and vegetables. With vitamin C, B vitamins, and 80 milligrams of natural caffeine from tea, V8 Plus Energy gives you steady energy you can feel good about. Harness the power of plants with V8 Plus Energy. Power up.
Ladies, gentlemen, geeks of all ages, you are now entering BJ Shea's Geek Nation. Welcome.
Yes, welcome to BJ Shea's Geek Nation. I am the Reverend in Fuego. Across from me is Vicky Barcelona.
Hello.
The show's namesake, BJ Shea, is on assignment. I think he went to go play board games in celebration of America.
He went to go Mimi's.
Oh, to Mimi's?
Oh, that's a term I just recently learned, like to go night-night.
Oh.
So we're going to go Mimi's.
Okay.
We're going Mimi's.
I was like, wait, he's going to read memes? I don't know what's going on here.
That's my night.
But running the boards is Joey D's. Hi. Well, while BJ goes Mimi's, we'll have Gareth von Kallenbach giving us some movie reviews and, of course, the Geek Sheet with Vicky B. Vicky, how can people get a hold of us?
Get a hold of us via our website, bjgeeknation.com. It's going to have our blogs, podcasts, and more. Or just search BJ Shea's Geek Nation on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, iTunes, and the Odyssey app.
Yes, definitely a lot of ways to check out our podcast. And, I really do appreciate when you gave us some of that feedback. Previously, people were mad because BJ would yell, Von Kallenbach! And, I think it was maybe one person was annoyed by that. So BJ took that to heart. And then we found out that no, people do love it when he yells, Von Kallenbach! And, since he isn't here, I did it twice for y'all. And, we're going to be speaking with Mr. Von Kallenbach.
Yay.
3 times the charm. Right now, Gareth von Kallenbach joins us from Skewed and Reviewed, that is sknr.net. And a lot of the times, especially these last couple of weeks, and gosh, maybe the whole year, we haven't been able to go see movies, so there haven't been any movie reviews, but what we have done is done a lot of movie news. But now, theaters are open, people get to go see the movies in person, and Gareth, you've had a chance to be able to do that, even starting with last week's Fast 9. What did you think about Fast 9?
Yeah, so Fast 9, as everyone knows, was originally due out last year, and like a lot of films, it was either sold off to a streaming service or delayed, and of course they delayed it, and it came out, was done very well overseas, done very well locally, and, the trick about it is it's one of these films that you have to really be in the right frame of mind to enjoy, and by that I mean you can sit there and tear it to pieces and go, this is absolutely absurd. This is absolutely preposterous. There's no way this would work. Prime example is they're running through a jungle in one of the early scenes, and my wife said, so they take a muscle car to go running through the jungle in. And I'm like, if that's your most unrealistic thing, you better sit back. You've got a long way to go. And that's kind of the beauty of it, because as she pointed out, and I think she summed it up very well, it's just so absurd, stupid, and ludicrous, which is ironic because ludicrous is actually a cast that you sit there going, how much dumber and more unrealistic can they be? And yet you're hooked to every single frame. And it's like, and that's the whole point. It's almost like you wonder if when they get into the writer's room, if they sit down and go, what is the craziest, most off-the-wall thing we could come up with? And you look over the history of the recent films. We've got the submarine. We've got the airplane chase on the runway that never seemed to end. 20 minutes later at high speed, they're still going down the runway. And, you're like, just how long is that thing? You have the train high. And that's what's so fun about it. It's, you check your brain at the door, and it's almost like everyone's in on the joke. There's this really funny meme of Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith flying in to take on the flagship, and there's Dom flying up next to him in a muscle car, and he's like, hey, wait a second, how are you making that work in space? And he goes, you don't need logic when you got family. And it's like, yeah, and that, I think, sums up the whole franchise just fine.
Yeah, I mean, you know what you're getting into. You know what you're getting into with those movies. So if you're going in there looking for something ridiculous like that, I feel you're not going to have a bad time whatsoever.
No, and the funny thing is for us, when we do our screenings down here, we have a studio rep that we have to talk to immediately after film and give them our reaction. It's not like you just email them the review later. And, you know, I heard one guy, oh, it was really stupid. It was unrealistic. Nobody could take a film like this seriously. And I'm thinking, have you seen any of the 8 previous films or the spinoff? I mean, like, were you, what exactly were you expecting? I mean, he's like, there was no character development and the plot was very thin. It's like, yeah, I always call it the Indiana Jones. It's like I told the rep, I said, they have the MacGuffin, which is like the least little excuse they need to get everyone together and send them around the world. Doesn't make sense. You can sit there and many times say, well, why didn't you do this? Why don't they do that? You're missing the point. It's all about how to get them all together and get those cars rolling all over the place, and then blow a few things up in the process, crash a few things. Problem solved, make way for the next 2, and then the spinoffs. Problem. There you go.
Perfect. Moving on from that, and that is out now, so you can watch that. But also out now, releasing today. First off is the Forever Purge. Since we're talking about legacies and franchises with Fast 9, the Forever Purge is part of the old Purge movies that involve, well, maybe a day that has or has not finally been outlawed. Is this in on the big screens as well?
Yes, it is. And the interesting thing about that is it may require a little bit of work for people in the fact that you had 3 Purge movies, and then you had the prequel, which was the first Purge. And around that time, you also had 2 TV series. Now, obviously, like any of the films, it is not necessary to see any of the previous films for this to work, because it does work as a standalone. But there are certain things, like, for example, anybody who saw the Purge election year knows that at the end of it, there was someone who came to power who wanted to outlaw the Purge, and there were people taking to the streets in protest because, A, they didn't want to accept the validity of the election. Boy, doesn't that sound familiar? And they wanted to overturn the Purge. So the trick is, then you got a prequel, and then you got the TV series. So when this film starts, we don't really know what happened in the intervening years. All we're told is that the Purge is being restored, and part of that is fueled by a new wave of xenophobia, a new wave of, we've got to do something about all these illegal aliens, we've got to do something about all these foreigners and their crime. And what is really kind of creepy about the films is, I've always said, as they go on, they almost seem like they're ripped from the headlines. And what is really disturbing about this is, this movie was supposed to come out last summer. This is another one that sat there. And then you watch it, and there are some elements to it that I don't want to give away, but they truly look like they're ripped out of the contemporary headlines in places. Whoa. And this was all, I mean, you think about it. This was ready to go a year ago, so that means at least 6 months prior is when they were all filming this, and who knows how much before then they were writing it. And it's, you know, and in the end, I think it's a case of, it didn't work for me as well as some of the other films, because the idea is that the other films all dealt about a group of people trying to survive the Purge night, and you learn a little more about it in the politics and the setting of the world as it goes on. In this one, Purge night is an afterthought. It's over and done really quick in the beginning of the film. It's about a group of militants who are unwilling to let it end and who continue it after the Purge night, who take on the law enforcement, who take on the military, with the exception of restoring the America they want. And that is where it's a little different, in that you don't have that little tension and the kind of invisible clock in your head going, if they could just make it to the morning, they're going to be okay.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of social commentary that, like I said, it's very creepy because it is literally ripped from the headlines where in some scenarios you could say, I could almost see this happening. And the fact that this was all put together over a year ago is what really makes it disturbing.
That is really interesting when it comes down to it, because much like George A. Romero's zombie films, Night of the Living Dead, so on and so forth, they were a bit of a social commentary, but not necessarily on things that are happening at the time, but just like, even with like Dawn of the Dead, just kind of like, how the malls are eating everyone's brains and just all the different sort of aspects of that. This seems to be a little prophetic and kind of frightening, to be perfectly honest.
It is, and I'm going to be really curious to see how it goes over, because the series has been successful in the fact that these are Blumhouse productions, so they don't have a large budget going in, and this is what has allowed them to be very popular. If they make $60 million at the box office, they're a massive hit because they don't have a lot invested in them. But the creator has gone on record as saying this was intended to be the final film. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of looking at it going, right, but if it goes on and makes money, are they really going to walk away from this cash cow? So it'll be very curious to see what they do with it. But it was, like I said, I preferred the other films better, but it still was very entertaining and engaging. And like the others, it really makes you go, And I think in a theater filled with people, it would really be interesting to hear how the audience responds to it.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting, and then you can kind of go back and watch them all. If it is indeed the last film, obviously, like you said, money talks, and we'll have to see what happens with that. Now, a movie that I'm not sure, I believe because Amazon Studios they kind of saved it, and they're putting it out. This is not available on the big screen, but more of the small screen, and that's Chris Pratt in the Tomorrow War.
Correct. Now, this was one of the, as I call them, pandemic victims, in that it was a movie done by Skydance, which is J.J. Abrams' company, with Paramount. And it was actually, they finished filming it, I want to say, in like January of 2020, right before everything went crazy. And so this was one of those movies that Paramount decided to take the money that was being offered from a streaming service rather than put it in limbo. And they actually did this with a few of their films. It was rather ironic that they kept A Quiet Place 2, they kept the Mission Impossible sequels, and they, of course, kept Top Gun 2 Maverick and were willing to continually push those back. But several other films they had on the calendars, they sold off to the streaming services. And this is a really interesting case in that it's a high-budget film that you could say is better than you would expect to see offered as a streaming service movie, but you're not quite sure it would have completely blown the box office doors off at the theater. It would have been a hit, but would it have been a $200, $300, $400 million hit? Who knows? So I could see it's kind of one of those things where Paramount was essentially, nobody really knows the full number, but you can essentially say production cost and some profit were guaranteed by selling it to Amazon. Let's take the safe bet because who knows when the right time to put this in the theaters will come. And that being said, it's a very entertaining film. It's over 2 hours long, and anybody who's seen the trailers knows it's essentially that a group of soldiers arrive from 30 years in the future and tell them that the human race is about to be destroyed by these aliens. They're desperate, and they start recruiting people from our time to jump 30 years in the future. They fight for a week, and anyone who's still left alive or somewhat functional gets sent back. And the whole idea is Chris Pratt gets drafted. He has to go into the future, and humanity is down to, I believe they said there's about 500,000 people left on the planet, and they're on the verge of going extinct, and they desperately are trying to find some way to stop these creatures. And it's interesting. The effects are good, and the way I look at it is there were several times in the film where I said, well, why don't you just do that? And why don't you just do that? You have time travel. And then they do explain them at a later date, which was actually pretty cool. Like, one of my things was, well, if these things between now and then building up defenses, so the moment they arrive, you you're prepared, and they address all of that later, much later in the film. They do address it. And there's a lot of action. The effects are pretty good. And so it's kind of like, I look at it and, okay, there's elements of various other things, but it is just what you want. It's kind of that gather everyone around, just watch 2 hours of mayhem and enjoy the ride. And, for that standpoint, it worked very well. And then you add the fact that it's streaming. It's like, yeah, why not? Why not turn it on and see what it's all about?
Exactly. I mean, even though you said that it was 2 hours long, you got the pause feature. Like, if you got to use the bathroom, you can go ahead and do it.
And if you decide, oh, I don't like the story, this is too stupid, the effects are decent. And there's some fun comic relief characters thrown in, and there's some, decent action, and, why not? And some really good supporting players, let's put it that way. Fans of 24 will appreciate some of the supporting characters that are in it, and, go from there. What I'm really curious to see is, it doesn't end on any cliffhanger or anything like this, but I'm very curious to see if Amazon has sequel rights or if they stay with Paramount, and if it's a hit, will they try to say, let's roll the dice and make a new chapter, because we all know that Amazon has not had problems throwing out huge amounts of money to produce content. Look at the amount of money they're spending on the Lord of the Rings series and so on.
Right.
So.
Exactly. So it'll be fun to see that. I'm actually kind of excited for that. And now finally, next week is the big release a lot of people are waiting for. We've got Black Widow, the return to the MCU with the character who, spoilers if you happen to know, and he doesn't make it very far, but this is a prequel to the character, and I would imagine that it fleshes out the character a bit more.
Quite a bit, actually, and that was really enjoyable, because a lot of people, when they announced it, were kind of, oh, why do we need the story? It's already been told. And some people were saying, well, because of what happened to her character, they're doing this just so, there's no hard feelings and a proper send-off and all of this stuff. And I thought, number one, you've never read comics, because characters die all the time and come back. So there is a way to bring, there's always going to be a way to bring them back. And what was so interesting about it was, number one, there was all this flack about Disney needs to release this on streaming, and they kept delaying it, and they kept delaying it. They made absolutely the right choice, because this is a big, major event film. And I was sitting there going, wow, has it really been 19 months since we had a Marvel movie on the big screen? But you sat there, and my only regret was we had a quiet press screening. I would have been interesting to hear what a full theater's audience reaction to was. But it was, it was great. You get all of this backstory about her. You learn about elements of her life as a child, but they don't make the whole movie about that. It's essentially a story set between Captain America's Civil War and Avengers Infinity War. And it fills in the gap about what she was doing on the run, while you get flashbacks about her earlier life and the Red Room. And then, without giving anything away, they have obviously a scene, well, only one, but there is a scene in the trailer, in the credits, and it ties in with the TV series. Not just ones that are out, ones that are coming. And now I understand why there were some people saying they needed to put this out before certain TV series aired. And it's like, no, it still works perfectly fine this way, because it is still a prequel. And it just, to me, really drove home why Marvel continues to hit one after another, while other studios have struggled to adapt superhero films over the decades, why some have been unable to have consistent quality and franchises. You look at some of the DC characters. For every, the first Wonder Woman hit, the second film didn't go over so well. Justice League didn't meet we can go on and on forever about this. Yeah. It's because Marvel, for whatever, some people always want to complain, there is a plan. There is a person at the top who has a very clear vision for several decades of these films, it seems. They cast well. They are not opposed to making changes if certain things are not working, bringing in different directors, cast people. The stories are interesting and they lock together. It doesn't seem like they're making these up as they go. They clearly seem to be saying, we're doing this because this is going to affect something down here. I mean, look at the new wave of films coming. They start off phase 4 with the prequel, but then you sit here and you have Doctor Strange in the Mouth of Madness after we get Shang-Chi, after we get the Eternals, after we get the next Spider-Man film. And then you find out, oh, yeah, WandaVision ties into that. And now we're hearing that, oh, yeah, you know what? Loki actually ties into it, too, because that bonus scene after the last episode, WandaVision, a couple of days ago, they changed it up just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Just a tiny bit and added something in, and people are saying, oh, my goodness, that's probably something that's coming in the Loki series right now. And you can see there is a plan. And then you hear all these things about the next Spider-Man film deals with the multiverse. And then, you know, you go on, and then you get all these questions like, look at the trailer for the Eternals. They've been here for centuries and have never been involved per se until now. And you go, what is making them get involved now? And then, you know, you hear about all these other things. There's the Thor movie. There's the Ant-Man movie. They just began production today on Wakanda Forever, the new Black Panther film. And it's so interesting. And there's so many of these live action series in the works. You know, you got the Hawkeye one coming, you've got Miss Marvel coming, and, you know, there's another Captain Marvel movie coming, and let's not even talk about Blade, and then the fact that, oh yeah, they've got the rights to Fantastic Four and Deadpool and the X-Men, and you can just see they've probably got the next 10 years of these films already, and TV shows already plotted out, and they're already sitting there going, you know, how do we link in what we're doing now with what we want to do, but also what's come before? And that's what's so exciting.
And that's one of the things that actually kind of gets me stoked as well, too, because you were talking about DC and just the simple fact that Marvel, I mean, they had a plan for the Infinity Saga, and they're definitely doing so much more with the multiverse as they're leading into it. I just feel that a lot of people are expecting, like, some sort of bombastic thing to come out of, like, a lot of the television shows. I mean, everyone was freaking out thinking that, you know, Mephisto is going to show up in WandaVision or somebody else that might show up in Loki. We don't even know at this point in time. So it's kind of entertaining at that aspect just to kind of see how things are now slowly piecing together, but then also watching everybody lose their minds over, you know, a post-credit scene that may have just been edited to fix a small thing, or it may be been done to include a character whom we don't know yet.
Exactly. And what I find really interesting is I have enjoyed the series, but to me, they work better as series. I don't think they would have worked as films per se, because there's a lot more backstory and a lot less action. And I think it was really interesting for me to see that when Black Widow finally arrived on the big screen, they keep the movies as event-level entertainment. These become must-see. That's why they put $200 million into them. They're not being cheap with the TV series, but with the TV series, they have the ability, you know, such as the most recent Loki episode. They basically didn't do anything but talk for the entire film. There was a very short episode, there was a very short action scene, but then there was that post-credit scene, and you go, oh, now this is interesting. This is really setting up possibilities. And that's the whole thing. It's the ability to say, we hope we've earned your faith enough to know we're definitely going somewhere with this. Just be a little patient. We're not just going to fill up every 5 minutes with a action scene, and just wait till you see where this all leads.
Super excited for all of this. Some great movie reviews there. People, go out to the theaters and buy some popcorn with that crappy butter. Remember how awesome those were? Well, go back and re-experience that if you can. Stay safe, everyone, and definitely check out sknr.net. That's Skewed and Reviewed. Get all those movie reviews. Get the TV show news and all the other stuff as well that you want. Again, Skewed and Reviewed. Thank you so much, Gareth.
Anytime. Take care.
Thank you so much, Gareth. And yes, a lot of movies out there to be watching right now with F9, The Forever Purge and the Tomorrow War, and, in the future with Black Widow. A lot of fun stuff with that. But now, it is time to get to
The Geek Sheet with Vicky B.
All right, Vicky, what do you got for us?
Something kind of cool for me because it's, local, specifically to where I grew up.
Okay.
So there's a very famous actor that went to the same high school as I did, of course, different years because he's older than me.
I know.
Who is it?
Chris Pratt.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Crispy Rat. Excuse me.
What?
Chris Pratt.
Crispy Rat.
Well, that was the joke. Chris Pratt.
Oh.
Anywho, Chris Pratt is also from Lake Stevens and went to the same high school as I did, which is probably the coolest thing my high school can say. Like, they're like, yeah, Vicky.
No, Vicky, everyone could be, isn't your name on a wall of fame or something like that?
It's, the bathroom maybe.
Oh, wow. Womp, womp.
And it was probably me who wrote it. I mean, a lot of people look at it, right? No, but for those who don't know, he does have a movie coming out. I believe it might be out this week.
Yeah, it is. It's on the Tomorrow War.
Yes, and he did an interview recently, and he talked about how he actually polled like a couple of his friends that were combat veterans. Like he got inspiration for his character from them, and these friends of his were teachers from Lake Stevens High School.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah, like Brent
cool.
Barnes, which in my head it's Mr. Barnes. Like it's so weird. It's like I remember Mr. Barnes, and Ken Collins was the principal at the time. For me, I think he was just a teacher or assistant principal when Chris Pratt went, but he was my principal. So it's kind of funny to think, oh yeah, my high school principal is, partially to thank for his performance.
That is really cool. Like, it's one of those things that you don't necessarily realize. Like, I'm trying to think back on a lot of my old school teachers, and like, I didn't know whether or not, I know a couple of them were like veterans. So, like, if I'm obviously not going to be asking about a role for that, but it's kind of interesting just that he was able to remember that, or
he stays in contact with these people. And I think that's really awesome that you're able to not only draw inspiration from a certain point in your life, but also like still be able to have them around and tell them about it and have them, actually get to see it.
Right. And I mean, it's got to be a hoot for them as well, because like I have to feel that as a teacher that you would be very stoked to have one of your students excelling at anything, much less being a Hollywood superstar at this point.
And it's funny because I always Mr. Collins, the principal, Ken Collins, he was always very nice whenever I did interact with him. And I say, not that I stayed out of trouble, I just stayed out of getting caught.
No, there you go.
That being said, I didn't have many interactions with him because I was good at not getting caught. But he was always very nice, but he was always very, what's the word? Stoic is not quite the word. He's just very, very military-esque in the sense. Like, he stood up straight, told it how it is. Like, he was very nice, but he also accepted no nonsense. So, it's like I could see it. Like, so I'm very curious to watch this and see if I can point out any. I'm like, oh, there's Mr. Barnes. Oh, there's Mr. Collins. And by the way, when you become an adult, you can never go back to, your teachers and call them by their first names. I feel like that's illegal.
It is very strange. I didn't go back, and I haven't talked to many of my high school teachers, but I did with the librarian, because she was the one, Mrs. Collins. So I can't call her Linda. Like, there's no way I can do that. But I went back and I thanked her because she was the one who got me reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and was like, the number 42 will be very important for you in the future after you read these. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So I wanted to go back and thank her, but it was that same thing. Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I could never, there's no way I was able to call her by her first name. It's too weird.
Right. Like, there's a teacher that really taught me, video production, and kind of shaped, because of that class, it very much shaped my future and everything I do, and, the jobs I took, everything. But I could never call him Will.
No.
He's shout out to Mr. Feroy.
Mr. Feroy!
In the box!
What? Huh?
It was a computer class or a video and TV production class, and we weren't allowed to have drinks.
Oh yeah,
anywhere near the equipment. So if you came in with a drink, there was a box by the door. So if he saw you with the soda or whatever, he's like, in the box. So everyone, like at least maybe our class, I don't know if anybody else did before or after, but everyone would just start yelling, in the box! In the box!
What's in the box? What's in the box?
We just mimic him. In the box. In the box.
I would love to hear people's shout outs to their teachers, how they influence them.
Especially something nerdy, but not necessarily just that.
Absolutely.
And until next time, guys, stay nerdy.